So, welcome everyone. It's time to start. My name is Virginie Chasserio, and I am your chair today for this session. Solve impact mysteries like an L&D detective. And I'm very excited, I have to tell you, for several reasons. First, it is Bastille Day today, and it's very important in French history. Second, this is a Learning Technology Summer Forum Day 2. Isn't that exciting? And you are already, we are already 177 in the room. Can you believe it? And you're all there to listen to a great speakers, and it's got a gift for you. So bear with us until the end of this webinar, please. And before I introduce our speaker, I would like to do some housekeeping with you. So we are going to use the chat for discussions, and you know very well how to use that. However, because we are a large number in this room, we are going to clear the chat regularly, but do not worry, everything will be archived, and your contribution will not be lost, and you will still be able to access it from the recording that will be available next week. So now, what about our speakers? So our speaker today is known in the industry as the Sherlock Holmes of Lnd. He investigates impact and results for training and learning. He uses facts, evidence, and data to measure learning influence on performance, behavior, actions, and business goals. And with 20 plus years in the learning development industry, his experience guides his perspective and informs his action for measuring efficiency, effectiveness, and outcomes for training, learning, and talent development. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce the L&D detective, Kevin M. Yates. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today. This is my very first virtual conference, particularly since we've entered into COVID and pandemic. So I'm super excited to be here today. And yes, they do call me the Sherlock Holmes of L&D. So I'm always looking for facts, and I'm looking for evidence, and I'm looking for data that shows the extent to which training, learning, and talent development have measurably impacted business goals. And so what I'm going to do today is share with you some of my L&D detective secrets. So you're going to get a peek behind the curtain for how I conduct impact investigations when I'm measuring results for training, learning, and talent development. So I'm super excited. I don't know if I said this already, but I am coming to you live from Chicago, Illinois, where the local time is 5:03 a.m. in the morning. I suspect that I get the prize for being up the earliest. So again, I'm super excited to join you today, seeing so many different people from around the world. And even earlier, as I took a look at the chat, I see that I have some friends who joined us today. So hello to one and all. So let's dive right in. And I like to start my sessions by sharing a little bit of my history, but I'm going to try to do this in about 30 seconds. If you haven't guessed it, the little boy in the upper left corner is me. And that's me more years ago than I'm going to tell you, because I don't want you to know how old I am. Let's just say that I have quite a few rings around the tree trunk, if you know what I mean. If you had asked that little boy, and I believe that maybe I was about 2 or 3 at that time, if you had asked him who he wants to be when he grows up, I doubt very seriously that he would have said that he wants to be an L&D detective when he grows up. Yes, I ended up being an L&D detective, but that little boy in the corner had no idea. I'm excited about the work that I do. I speak all around the world about measuring impact. I write a lot of blogs, write a lot of magazine articles, and do a lot of speaking. So again, that little boy that's in the upper left corner had no idea that he was going to be an L&D detective. So again, what I'm going to do today is just share with you some of my secrets. But before we dive in, I want to ask you a question. And that question is, how do you define impact? So just take a moment and share with us, share with me, how do you define impact? What does impact mean to you? I'm excited to hear your thoughts, see your thoughts, hear your ideas, so that we can figure out how close or how far we are in our thinking. All right, awesome. I'm seeing some good things come in. Some people are saying behavior change. Some people are saying engagement, change in behavior, measurable success, demonstrated results, success, improved performance. Yes, that's awesome. See some really good responses coming in, and the theme that I'm seeing here is business results. So it looks as though a lot of us are on the same page when we're thinking about what impact is. So thank you for joining me in that discussion. I want to share with you what my definition of impact is. My definition of impact is pretty simple, and this is the context for the work that I do as a learning and development detective. So when I'm thinking about impact, I'm thinking about the extent to which training and learning is measurably influencing behavior, performance, actions, and business goals. So this is the context of my work as an L&D detective. And when I'm looking for data and facts and evidence and how I'm thinking about impact, this is exactly what I'm thinking about. All right, so this is the context for everything that we're going to be talking about today. So keep that in mind. So I have some guiding principles, and my guiding principles are what really help me focus when I am doing my work as an L&D detective. And I just want to go ahead and share with you what those guiding principles are. For me, performance is the North Star, and that means everything that I do is linking back to the extent to which training, learning, and talent development is actually impacting performance. The second guiding principle that I have is that you can't measure everything, nor should you. And I have some ideas for how you can ensure that you are measuring the right thing, because again, you can't measure everything. That's followed up by the idea that if you don't plan for impact in the beginning, it's going to be very difficult to measure in the end. And this is where I see one of the biggest challenges in the global learning and development industry is that we aren't planning for impact in the beginning, and that is what makes it so much difficult to measure in the end. But I have some ideas for you for how to plan for impact in the beginning. Um, the other guiding principle is that measuring impact may not be easy, but it is absolutely possible. So L&D detective work can be very complicated. There are a lot of twists and turns in the plot when you are measuring impact for learning and when you're doing L&D detective work. So it's not easy, but it's absolutely possible. And then my last guiding principle is the idea that if you can find just one thing about a person's performance or behavior or actions, if you can find that one thing, let that one thing lead to the facts, the evidence, and the data for impact. All right. So how do you plan for impact in the beginning? Because you may recall that one of the guiding principles I have is that if you don't plan for impact in the beginning, it's going to be difficult to measure in the end. So there are 10 questions. I'm sorry, I'm going too far ahead. How do you know when you should conduct an impact investigation? That's where I am. I'm going too fast. I'm too far ahead of myself. So there are 6 questions that you should ask to determine whether or not the training solution or the learning solution that you want to measure impact for is actually eligible for an impact investigation. So the first question that you want to ask is whether or not that training or learning solution has executive support or executive sponsorship or executive visibility. The next question that you want to ask, and again, we're looking at questions that determine whether or not you should measure impact for that solution. The next thing you want to be thinking about is parity. So the question is whether or not that training or learning solution is aligned to a business goal. The third question that you want to ask is whether or not there is a specific target for performance outcomes. If that training or learning solution does not have a specific target for performance outcomes or behavior outcomes, then I don't recommend that you put forth the effort to measure impact for that. The fourth question that you want to ask is whether or not there is performance support in place for that learning solution that is sustainable. And here's why that's important. If you have not planned a solution that is purposely designed for the continuum of performance to improve and change over time, it's probably not going to have a sustainable impact on training. So if it's just one class, one program, it's probably not going to sustain performance. And so then that might not be something where you want to measure impact. The next idea then is, I get these switched. Oh my goodness, I'm going too fast. Priority. Let me go back. Pinpoints. Pinpoints. Does the learning solution or the training program have actionable measures for it? I'm getting too excited, team. I'm going too fast. Parameters. I'm going to slow down a little bit. Parameters. Does that training solution have the support in place to sustain performance over time? And then the last question that you want to ask is whether or not there's a payoff. So if there is a significant investment in the training or learning solution, then it's more than likely that you want to go ahead and make the investment in doing the detective work and doing the investigative work. So now that I have hopefully not totally confused you by going too far ahead of my own self, take a look at these 6 questions. Take a look at these 6 questions. And I just want you to reflect. I don't want you to use the chat or anything like that. Or you can if you want, maybe. But I just want you to reflect. How many of these questions could you answer for your training and learning solutions? How many of your solutions are actually eligible for an impact investigation? So again, just think about that. Just reflect on that. When I am asked to conduct an impact investigation, if the answer to these 6 questions is not yes, then I will not conduct an impact investigation. I actually just wrote an article about this that gives a lot more detail. If you go out to my website, you'll get a pop-up and you can take a look at that. All right, so let's keep going here. So in my work and in my experience, what I have found is that about 1 to 5% of our training and learning programs are actually ready for an impact investigation. And that's a pretty small number. So if you go back and think about these questions, how many of our programs are actually meeting the criteria that we've set here? My experience tells me that only about 1 to 5%. So how can we get that number up? How can we do a better job at planning proactively for programs that measurably impact performance? There are 10 questions that you can ask that will ensure that your training programs are ready for measurable impact. The first question that you want to ask is, what is the business goal? So when you're conducting an impact opportunity investigation as an L&D detective, the first question that you want to ask is, what is the business goal? The second question that you want to ask then is, what is the condition? The condition is the context. So are you wanting to improve quality, reduce time, reduce errors? That's the context of the business goal, and that's the second question that you have to ask. The next question that you have to ask is, who are the contributors? So the contributors are the key players, and by key players, I mean the other parts of the business that are coming together to help the business achieve a goal, because winning is a team sport, and no one group or function in the business can achieve a business goal by itself. So we have to be clear about all the different key players that there are who are responsible or who are going to help the business achieve a goal. The next question that we want to ask then is, who are the people? And by the people, I mean the different roles that are in the business that are going to help the business achieve a goal. So again, just to backtrack here, what I am sharing with you are the questions that you have to ask up front before the training solution is designed, before it is shipped, before it is built. These are questions that L&D detectives have to ask and have to get answers to before you design a solution or before you even build a solution. The next question then is capability. This is where we talk about performance. So this is where we want to get information on what the performance requirements are to achieve the business goal. We have to know what that is so that we can design our solution appropriately and so that we can plan for measurable impact. The next question that we ask is the comparison. So the idea is that because there's need for training or learning, we want to be able to compare and contrast where performance is and where it needs to be in order to achieve the business goals. So this is the sixth question that we have to ask. The next question that we have to ask is around causation. So when we think about performance, we want to be thinking about the different things that influence performance, the different things that drive performance, the different things that change performance. So that's a question that we need to ask in advance. And then the next question that we want to get answered is around calculations. And that is the specific measures, the specific KPIs, the specific metrics that give insight on the extent to which we are meeting the business goal and the extent to which performance is changing or performance is influenced or performance is impacted. And then the very last question that we have to ask is, what are the risks? And the risks identify what may potentially prevent the business from achieving the business goal and what may potentially inhibit performance. So I got to tell you this. This is so important. When I think about the things that prohibit training and learning from being able to produce results for measurable impact or evidence or facts or data, it is because these 9 questions have not been asked. So I would say for the time that I'm going to spend with you today, I hope that everything is valuable and that everything is important and helps you. But what I'm going to say is that if you can get the answers to these 9 questions before you design your training program, before your program is shipped, before anyone is engaged in training, if you can get the answers to these 10 questions and use those answers to inform decisions about how to design training that measurably impacts business goals, that measurably impacts people's performance, if you can get those answers, then you are setting yourself up for success when you design your training programs so that they measurably impact people's performance. And again, these 9 questions inform decisions for how to build training and learning solutions that measurably impact people's performance. Again, if you go out to my website, I have an article that I just wrote that dives much deeper into how to get the answers to these questions, more time than I have today. But I do recommend that you go out and take a look. So we have another question for you. How ready are your programs for measurable impact? How many of these questions could you ask if you were asked? Let's see what's coming in. All right. Some people said none. Some people said just a few. I'm trying to see who the winner is here. Looks as though less than half, more than half are kind of tied. Just a few running neck and neck. And again, as you're thinking about this and reflecting, the idea here again is that the more questions that you can answer when you are doing L&D detective work and investigative work, the more questions that you can answer, the more likely it is that you'll be able to produce a solution that measurably impacts people's performance. Yep, and someone just corrected me. There are actually 10 questions in my article. The last question is more referenced after you have decided that training and learning is a solution. So that's what that 10th question is all about in my article. All right. Thank you for joining the polling question. I'm seeing where we're running pretty close with just a few, less than half, more than half, right? The fact that you're even asking some of these is exciting and encouraging to me. So keep up the good L&D detective work. All right, so now the question is, what does it look like when we are collecting clues, facts, evidence, and data for the impact of training and learning? So again, I'm looking for 3 kinds of clues, 3 kinds of facts, 3 kinds of evidence, and that is learning performance evidence, people performance evidence, and business performance evidence. So when I'm collecting clues and facts and evidence as an L&D detective, I am combining those 3 data sources and I am looking for ways in which they show the extent to which there is actual measurable impact on people's performance and business performance. So I'm going to share with you some examples of what some of those clues look like and what some of that evidence looks like. So this is an example of clues that come from a learning evaluation, right? So immediately following a training program or a training experience, we collect data or we collect clues from employees that help give us insight into the performance of the learning solution. So if you take a look at this example, there are 2 questions here. The question on the bottom is a clue from immediately following the program. The question on the top is a clue from 30 days after the program. So on the bottom question, immediately following the program, we are asking our participants to estimate the extent to which they believe that learning experience will measurably impact their performance. And then the top question, we ask 30 days later when they've actually been on the job and had a chance to do the work. And what we're asking them is, how much do you believe the learning experience has actually changed your performance? So if I take a look at this, my benchmark is 75%. So if I take a look at this for where I want the highest amount of response to be, I can see here where we've not quite met that 75% benchmark, right? So this is a clue. This is an insight into the extent to which we can expect a change in behavior, performance, and actions based on what our employees have to say. Here's another example. Again, this is another example where the question on the bottom is what we ask immediately following the program. The question on the top is what we ask 30 days after the program. And this is where we are estimating the extent to which people are actually using what they learn. So this is another clue. This is another clue for learning's performance. And again, if the benchmark is 75% for the highest response rates, at the top, we are just about 5 points away, and then at the bottom, we are a few points more away. So again, the idea is that we're collecting clues that will help us determine the extent to which training and learning will actually impact performance. And here's another clue for learning performance. The most straightforward question: do people see the correlation or the connection between using what they learned and achieving the business goal? In this example, we can see here where the largest majority of employees do see the connection between using what they learn and achieving the business goal. So again, these are clues. So as an L&D detective, you're continuing to look for clues that will show the extent to which training and learning will impact behavior, performance, and actions. Now let's look at some clues for continued clues for learning performance. This is an example of performance support, right? So remember I talked earlier about learning being a continuum, and we want to look for whether or not there's sustainable support for it. This is an example of how people are using performance support following a program. So these are different types of support that follow a program. And when I look at this, what immediately stands out for me is that people are not using white papers, right? So we can expect that there's not very much value perceived for using white papers, and that there's much more value perceived for using videos. So if we're trying to collect this chain of evidence that shows the extent to which we can expect behavior and actions to change, I would say that we can expect that more behavior will change, and there will be more impact on performance based on people using videos, because videos has the highest utilization. So learning performance is one of the clues that we can look for. The other way that we can look for clues is by using test and control groups. So when we think about test and control groups, the test group is the group that gets the training, that gets the learning, that takes the online classes. And then the control group is the group that where everything stays the same. So they don't get the training, they don't get the learning. The reason that we want to do test and control groups is because it gives us insight into what we can expect when people engage in training or take a training program. And we want to use test and control groups because before we push out anything to too many people, we want to have some evidence that it actually works. So when the test group takes the training and takes the classes, we do some measurement after that, and then we compare where there may be a difference between the test group and the control group, because the idea is that something will change with the test group. And we're expecting things potentially to stay the same with the control group. So what we're trying to do is determine whether or not training actually made a difference. So I want to show you what that looks like, show you how that works. So this is an example of some evidence. Remember, we're looking for facts, clues, and evidence. This is an example of evidence from a customer support center. So remember, the test group is the group that gets the training. The control group is the group where everything stays the same. So we want to see if there are any differences between the two groups. So in this example, we can see that in the beginning, there were the customer satisfaction score was 35%, and that was for everyone, and that was in Q1. And then in Q2, there was some training. So what we can see here is that in Q2, the control group customer satisfaction rate was 30%, but the test group, and remember the test group is the group that took the training, their customer satisfaction rate was 50%. So when we take a look at this example, this is a clue, this is evidence that training actually impacted performance, because we can see the difference between the test group and the control group. Here's another example using business performance. So the other thing that I'm looking for when I'm looking for facts, clues, evidence, and data is actual business performance data. So this is an example of the different types of business data that I look at, that I use for evidence and for clues when I am searching for business impact, right? So as you take a look at what these different clues or evidence are for business performance, what other ideas do you have for the different types of data or the different types of evidence that you could look for in your business that shows the extent to which there was a change in behavior, actions, or performance? So what do you think? Share that with us. What are some of the other kinds of clues, data from business performance that you could take a look at? I am interested to hear what you have to say. All right. Benchmarking, accidents, complaints, status. Wow. You guys are coming up with some good examples. So it sounds as though many of you maybe already have some ideas about the different types of business performance data that you can use to show the extent to which there is a change in behavior, actions, and performance as a result of training. Thank you for sharing. These are some really great examples. All right, let's go back to the presentation. All right, so I want to show you a couple of examples of how I use business data and how I use test and control groups as I am continuing to search as the L&D detective for facts, evidence, and data. So in this example, you'll see where the blue line is the control group and the orange line is the test group. Remember, the test group is the group that gets the training. The control group is the group where everything stays the same. So this one is interesting, right? Something is standing out for me. When I look at this with my L&D detective magnifying lens here, something interesting happened here. So the idea with test and control group is that when we are thinking about what the test group gets that maybe heightens their performance and how things stay the same with the control group, if you look at this example team, you'll see where that didn't happen. If you go toward the end of the trend line, you'll see where performance actually dropped for the test group. And the control group, the group that didn't get the training, is actually outpacing or exceeding performance for the test group. So something interesting happened here. So this is an example of where you would have to put on your Sherlock Holmes Lnd detective hat and begin to take a look at why and where there might be a difference. So I want to show you another example of what that looks like. Here's another test and control group situation. And what we're using here is sales as the example. So we have multiple control groups and we have one test group. Remember, the test group is the group that got the training. The control groups, everything stayed the same. So the idea is that there will be something different about the performance for the test group than there is for the control group. And if you take a look here and you go toward the end of the trend line, the test group is blue, right? So you can see that there's an upward trend for that test group. And so that tells me that the training solution was effective in impacting people's performance for the test group, because you can see where their performance exceeded that for the control groups. So again, this is just an example of how I collect evidence, facts, and clues using test groups and control groups to show the extent to which training and learning has made a difference. All right. So in summary, what I want to share with you again, just to bring it back to where we started, and we want to leave time for you to ask me questions. What I want to go back to is the idea of my guiding principles, right? So performance is the North Star. Everything that I do as an L&D detective is guided by the work that I do when I'm thinking about performance. You can't measure everything, and you remember those 6 questions that I shared that you can ask to determine whether or not there is something that you should measure. If you don't plan for impact in the beginning, it's going to be difficult to measure in the end, and that's why I shared with you those 9 questions. Measuring impact may not be easy, but it's absolutely possible. There are lots of twists and turns in the plot, but there are a few things that I hope I've shared with you today that just give you some ideas about how to measure impact. And then the last thing, if you don't plan, or rather, if you are thinking about measurement and you're trying to find maybe one thing in terms of behavior and performance that was changed as a result of training or learning, let that one thing lead to the facts about impact. So I think we definitely have some time for questions, but I'm gonna break the mold here, and definitely want to break share one insight, and then we'll take questions. I want to go back to this one, and I want to go back to this one because again, this is where I see most L&D organizations globally have the greatest challenge when it comes to measuring impact. I'm actually creating something free for you that I'm going to talk about toward the end of this that talks about these 9 questions. If you get the answers to these 9 questions, you are so much better positioned to create training and learning that will measurably impact performance because these questions inform decisions for when training and learning is a solution and when it's not a solution. So these are the 9 questions that literally guide all the work that I do. So I just wanted to stress that again. And again, I'm going to share with you a little
Of
surprise at the
course,
end.
yes. Thank you very
So,
much for this presentation. So
Virginia,
everyone
do we want to
commented
take
on
some
your
questions now?
great energy and how clear it was. Congratulations on that. And we do have
Oh my goodness. There was so much I tried to get through in 30 minutes, team. So if you might feel my energy as being rushed energy. It was me trying to get through everything. So I'm hoping that something stuck. I'm hoping that something stuck, and I'm hoping
Okay,
that you
so let's
found
start
something
with
to
these
help you be an
nine
L&D
questions
detective.
actually.
All right, bring
So
it,
the
bring
first
them on.
question
What
was
questions do we
when to
have?
ask this question, and the second one is what is the connection between causation and environment?
Ooh, I love that question. So the question is, when do you ask these questions? You ask these questions before anything is designed, before anything is launched. You have to ask these questions in the beginning. You can't you can't ask these questions at the end. You can't ask these questions after you've designed the program. If you ask these questions before the program, before the training solution, you get what you need to design the program in a way that it will measurably impact performance, right? So when you're asking these questions, if your discussion starts to talk about training, the online solution, the online course, you're having the wrong conversation. You have to stay focused on what these questions are getting at. Business goals, performance requirements to achieve those goals, causation. Perfect segue because the second question was about causation. So, what is causation? Think about a person's performance. There are different things that impact or influence a person's performance. So, here's some examples. Manager support influences a person's performance. Rewards and recognition impacts a person's performance. Environmental factors, natural ability. So when I talk about causation, what I'm talking about are the different things that impact or influence an individual's performance. So, again, it may be the manager support, rewards and recognition, compensation.
Thank
There are different things that influence a person's
And you're
performance other
making
than
the
training and learning.
perfect connection to our next
Thank you for
question.
asking
So
that question.
Chris asks you, how reliable is asking people how much their own performance has improved? And Tandy commented, yeah, how you counter the challenges of self-measurement. You're asking people to measure themselves. It's subjective. So is it reliable?
It is sentiment. It is it is a clue. So I want to go back to that example so that we can see exactly what that question is about, right? So the question is, how reliable is this? How credible is this? We have to take this in context because as the people who asked the question said, this is bias, right? But it's still a clue. It's a signal. It's something that we can use to determine the extent to which we can expect behavior and performance to change. It is absolutely subjective, but I believe most people are honest. I believe that most people will tell the truth. So I wouldn't necessarily rely on this as the answer for whether or not there was a business impact, but rather what I'm really going to look at is something like this to show the actual impact. So what I would do is compare what I see here with the actual business data to what we heard people say when we asked them this question. So again, this is biased, it is subjective, but it's a
Okay,
clue. It's a
thank
clue, and
you.
we're just looking for clues.
So yes, so Tandy is asking, are you using ROI,
Next
return
question.
on investment, or ROE, return on expectation? So which one is better?
So I don't know that one is better than the other, and I use a little bit of both in my L&D detective work. And I want to contextualize how I define ROI. So when I define ROI, return on investment, I am defining that in a monetary sense. So dollar to dollar, did we get the return on the investment? And that actually goes back to, let's go here. Going to show you where return on investment when we talk about money comes into play. So the last one here is payoff. So there are times, depending on the investigation, where I am looking at return on investment, meaning are we getting the return on the investment for the money that we spent? Return on effort, I don't know that I use return on effort as much. If I were to take a look at which one I use the most between the two, return on investment, and by investment I mean monetary, and return on
Thank
effort,
you.
I'm
So we
using
do have some
ROI more
questions
so
also and
than
comments about your
ROE.
control groups and test groups. So Chris is asking, how do you ensure that the test and control groups are comparable? In large organizations, it may be easier, but in small organizations. And then we have a comment here, how many organizations have the luxury of test and control groups? In reality, how practical is such an exercise, Con is asking. And Nicolas, you said, agree with Con. And ethically, how do we feel with having a group where we do not have support, where we do not support their performance? Sorry.
Yep. So I want to take that last question first. So the idea again is that if you have a test and a control group, the test group is getting the training, the control group is not. So the reason that the control group is not getting the training is so that we can take what we learn from the test group where we need to make the program better, where we may need to improve something, where we may need to take something out, and then we can give that same training to the control group. So it's not that we aren't giving training to the control group. We're using the test group to determine where we can make improvements, where we can make training better, where we can produce the outcomes that we're looking for. So it's kind of the test group is what we're using to, figure out where we need to work out the kinks or where we need to make training better or where we need to ensure that it is producing the outcomes that we expect. So again, it's not that the control group won't get the training. The control group will have that experience, but they'll have an even better experience because of what we've learned from this test group. And then the first question was around how do you get around test groups and control groups if you're working for a very small organization? If you're working for a small organization or have a small number of people, then you probably cannot use a test group and a control group. But the essence of what you can do in replacement of a test and control group is just monitor the performance, the business outcomes, the business metrics, the business data for that one group that you are training and see if there is a lift or see if there's a change in any of those business performance metrics by itself. You just won't have the benefit of a control group to compare it to. So again, if you don't have the luxury of a large audience, then you can just use the one audience that you have and monitor the differences that you're seeing in the performance for that group. So that was the first question. The third
So
question,
it's
what was
about
that middle
ensuring
question?
the
I'm not
test
sure
group
if
and control
I
group are
answered it or not.
comparable. And yes, how many organizations have the luxury of test and control groups? In reality, all right.
Yep, so that was the first question, and I just answered that one. Yep, and so how do you make sure that the test groups and control groups are comparable? So that's where you have to be very specific in identifying your audience. That's a great question because you don't want to have people with different levels of experience that are in the test group and the control group because you want to be able to compare apples to apples, for example. You might want to make sure that you are taking into consideration any cultural differences when you're thinking about test groups and control groups. So you might not want to have one test group in one country and a control group in another country because some of the cultural differences might impede the results of the data. So you do have to do the front end work to make sure that the test group and the control group are very similar in terms of role, in terms of experience, in terms of demographics. So that's what you have to do at the front end. And if you don't do that work, it might compromise the integrity of the data. So I think I've answered all three questions, but I did it out of order.
So many questions. We won't be able to ask all of them.
What other questions do we have?
Yes, we can ask another question. So how do you isolate cause and effect for learning when there are so many other factors impacting performance, even in control groups? And this is a a question from Donald.
Yep. So the question is, how do you isolate the impact of training? And this kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier in that there are different things that impact performance. Think about yourself, I'll think about me. So what are the different things that impacts your performance? Just think about that for a moment. So the different things that impact my performance, for example, are some of those examples that I gave out earlier, like rewards and recognition, compensation, manager support, technology support environment. There are different things that impact people's performance. And so Donald's question is, how do you isolate the impact? One of the ways in which I isolate the impact of training comes from a method that comes from the ROI Institute, Jack and Patty Phillips. The essence of what they do is query participants, and they ask them to attribute the percent of their performance that has improved to their training. So I may say that my performance has improved 90% because of training. All right, so I've isolated that impact. The next thing that I'll do then is be asked to identify the confidence that I assign to the estimate that I just made. So how confident am I that 90% of my performance improvement comes from training and learning? And I might say that I am 95% confident of that. So when I am averaging that out for the different people whom I ask, and I'm averaging out the confidence level, the essence of what I get then is one confidence level percentage based on what people said themselves for what they attribute training and learning to in terms of influencing their performance. And if you're more interested in that, I'll share that with you if you reach out to me on LinkedIn. But to answer Donald's question, one of the ways in which I isolate the impact of training and learning is to use the method that comes from Jack and Patty Phillips at the ROI Institute. And the essence of what I'm doing is asking participants to give their estimate for how much they believe training and learning impacted their performance. I'm asking them to assign their own confidence level to that. I'm aggregating those numbers, creating the average, and then that is what I use as an indicator or a clue for the extent to which we can associate the impact of a change on performance to training and learning.
Well,
Hopefully that didn't sound too complicated. It's a lot easier than it sounds. And again, that comes from Jack
That's a
and
very
Patty
good point,
Phillips, so
actually.
I
And
really have
just
to acknowledge
in
them for
1
coming up with
minute,
that method.
if you could explain how we can use the results we get from all this evidence, how do we tell the story?
So I'm going to give you a teaser because we got just a few minutes left and I want to wrap up. Why don't I go to the end to answer that question? The question is, how do you present these results? Well, I have something free for you, everybody. I am producing an L&D detective kit, and it is free. If you go to my website, you can sign up via email to get a copy of the L&D detective kit. In the L&D detective kit, I am going to explain in more detail what I've talked about today, but I'm going to also answer that last question that came in. And that last question is, how do you present the results? How do you tell the story for how training and learning impacted someone's behavior, performance, and actions? If you sign up to get one of
Thank
these
you very
L&D
much. And you
detective
get the
kits, I'm going to show you
resources
exactly how to do that.
from the chat pod. So this is already the end of this session. So well done, everyone. Thank you very much, Kevin, for this great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your discussion in chat. You can now find some useful items you can copy paste for yourself, and you have the link as well to the L&D Detective Kit. I want to say a big thank you as well to our sponsor for today, Docebo, without which this session wouldn't be possible. You can also download the slide at the bottom of the screen and be ready for the next session, so starting in 15 minutes. And you have already the link in chat if you want to attend the next one. So thank you very much again, everyone, for your participation. Thank you very much, Kevin, for getting up so early in the morning, for all the energy you brought during this session and for our day as well. And goodbye, everyone.